What if I told you that the single greatest force driving the collapse of empires isn't the ambition of conquerors or the failure of crops, but a simple, predictable, and terrifying financial pattern that is replaying right now in front of our eyes? This isn't just history. This is the darkest series on the hidden engine of human destruction. Within the next minutes, you will see the ghost in the machine of history, the one variable that, when it tips, makes war not a choice, but a mathematical certainty. By the end of this, you will understand the script that bankrupt nations are forced to read from, and you will see the same lines being rehearsed on the world stage today. Let's begin not in a dusty archive, but in a moment of absolute, godlike power. It's 1571, the Battle of Lepanto. Picture the young King Philip II of Spain, ruler of the first global empire upon which the sun never sets. He stands in his palace, the scent of orange blossoms from the gardens, mixing with the wax of 1,000 candles. A messenger arrives, breathless. The Holy League, bankrolled by Spanish silver, has shattered the Ottoman fleet. It is the most decisive naval victory in centuries. The joy in that room is palpable, ecstatic, a tidal wave of religious and imperial triumph. Philip II is the savior of Christendom. His credit is infinite, his power unquestioned. This is the peak. This is the joy of imperial zenith. But beneath the marble floors, in the ledgers of the Genoese and German banking houses, a different story is being written. Every one of those glorious galleons was bought on credit. The victory celebration itself was financed by debt, and that debt has a cold, unforgiving master. This is the debt domino effect. It is not merely about owing money. It is the predictable, multi-stage process where a sovereign state, drowning in unpayable debt, finds that its options narrow to a single catastrophic release valve: large-scale, external war. It is the financial trapdoor that opens beneath the feet of empires. And to understand it, we must first understand the man who best embodied its first fall: Philip II. Philip wasn't a reckless spender. He was a victim of his own empire's success. The rivers of silver flowing from Potosi in modern-day Bolivia should have made him the richest man in history, and they did, on paper. But the reality was a constant, desperate cash flow crisis. His vast empire was stretched thin, requiring a massive, standing military to defend it from the Ottomans, the French, the English, and Dutch rebels. So he turned to the bankers. He borrowed against the future silver shipments, the asientos. The system worked, until it didn't. In 1557, just a few years before Lepanto, Philip did the unthinkable. He declared the first sovereign default in modern history. He simply stopped paying his debts.
Now imagine you are a German banker in Antwerp. You have lent the King of Spain a fortune based on his impeccable reputation and the solid collateral of New World silver. You've built your entire firm's future on this. Then, the letter arrives. The debt is gone, vanished. The shock is absolute, a physical blow. Your credibility, your wealth, your family's future, obliterated by a royal signature. This wasn't a market correction, it was a financial heart attack that seized the credit markets of Europe. But Philip and Spain got away with it. The silver was too tempting. The bankers, lured by the promise of extravagant interest, came back. They always come back. This is the first seductive stage of the domino effect, the addictive cycle of borrowing against a glittering future. Philip II defaulted again in 1560, 1575, and 1596. Each time, the shockwaves grew more severe. But here is the crazy, counterintuitive historical fact. These defaults didn't immediately cause his collapse. They enabled it. By severing the link between fiscal responsibility and political power, he created a monster. The debt was no longer a chain that bound him. It was a weapon he could break over the heads of his creditors. This is the black pill truth. When you are too big to fail, failure becomes a strategic tool. The reliability of this pattern is chilling. The same psychological shift happens every single time. The state realizes it is not a mere debtor, it is a sovereign, and its sword is bigger than any banker's ledger. But the trap was closing. By the 1580s, the cost of maintaining the empire was spiraling. The Spanish Armada, the great fleet intended to crush England and end the pirate raids on its silver ships, was the ultimate expression of this debt-driven desperation. The 130 ships of the Armada were the most expensive military project in the world, and it was almost entirely financed by yet more loans from Genoese bankers, backed by promises of silver that were still deep in the mines of the Andes. Picture the scene in Lisbon Harbor, 1588. The greatest fleet ever assembled, a forest of masts and sails, its soldiers and sailors believing in the divine mission of their king. They cannot see the financial fragility that built it. They cannot see that this entire enterprise is a high-stakes gamble, a bet placed with someone else's money to save an empire from its creditors. When the Armada was destroyed by storms and English fireships, it wasn't just a military defeat. It was a national bankruptcy declared on the high seas. The shock of the defeat was matched only by the chilling silence from the banking houses. The credit was gone. The domino had tipped. Spain's long, slow decline was now locked in, not because it lost its fighting spirit, but because it had exhausted its financial soul.
The story of Spain is the prototype. But the domino effect doesn't just topple one empire, it gets passed on, like a cursed relic, to the next rising power. And in the 18th century, that power was France. If Spain's downfall was built on silver, France's was built on a man. A brilliant, charismatic Scotsman with a scheme so audacious it nearly broke the Western world. His name was John Law. After the extravagance of Louis XIV, the French treasury was a smoking crater. The state was bankrupt, its credit in ruins. Into this void stepped John Law, a convicted murderer and gambler, but also a financial visionary. He convinced the regent of France to let him establish a central bank and issue paper money, backed not by gold, but by the vast potential of the French colony of Louisiana, a land he fantastically described as filled with mountains of gold and silver. The Mississippi Company was born. This was the first true stock market bubble in history. The joy was insane, euphoric, a city-wide mania. The Rue Quincampoix in Paris, where the shares were traded, became a perpetual carnival. Nobles, servants, merchants, and foreigners shoved and fought to buy paper shares. A hunchback made a fortune by renting his back as a writing desk. A waiter became a millionaire overnight. The air was thick with the smell of greed and the sound of coins clinking. For a brief, glorious moment, everyone was rich. The French national debt vanished, absorbed by the magic of the rising share price. This was the ultimate financial hack, a cure for all economic ills. But it was a hallucination. There was no gold in Louisiana. There were swamps and mosquitoes. The inevitable crash came in 1720. The paper money became worthless. The millionaires became paupers again by morning. The shock was so profound, so traumatic, that it gave the French an enduring, pathological hatred of bankers and paper currency for a century. The entire French economy was shattered. The monarchy's credibility was destroyed. The reliability of this part of the pattern is terrifying. The bigger the financial bubble, the more violent the pop, and the more profound the societal trauma that follows. This trauma festered for generations. It created a powder keg of public resentment against a financial system that was seen as corrupt and rigged for the elite. The monarchy, now drowning in debt again from supporting the American Revolution, tried to raise taxes. But the memory of John Law's betrayal was too fresh. The Estates General were called, the Bastille was stormed, and the French Revolution began. The reign of terror that followed, the guillotines, the chaos, it all traces a direct line back to a single catastrophic financial failure. The debt domino, tipped in Paris in 1720, didn't just cause a market crash. It literally decapitated a monarchy and unleashed a continent-wide war that would be led by a young Corsican artillery officer. The domino of sovereign debt had fallen in Spain, rattled through France, and now it was about to be picked up by the nation that would perfect the art of using finance to wage total war: Great Britain. And this is where the story takes its most dangerous turn, because the British didn't just suffer the debt domino effect, they learned to weaponize it. They built a system designed to push the final, terrible cost of their ambitions onto their rivals, creating a financial doomsday device that would lock Europe into a cycle of conflict for a century. They discovered that if you can make your enemy go bankrupt first, you win. But how did they build this machine? And what was the secret, brutal financial instrument they created that made global war not just possible, but inevitable? That is the story we are exploring now.
If the fall of Spain was a slow bleed and the collapse of France was a sudden explosion, then the rise of Britain was a cold, calculated mastery of the very forces that destroyed its predecessors. The British elite, watching the chaos of the French Revolution from across the Channel, understood a fundamental truth. Victory in the modern world would not go to the nation with the bravest army, but to the one with the deepest pockets and the most resilient credit. They would not just participate in the debt domino effect, they would learn to tip the domino onto everyone else. This is the story of how Britain built a financial doomsday machine and, in doing so, created the blueprint for the wars of the 20th century and the precarious world we inhabit today. The cornerstone of this system was the Bank of England, established in 1694. Unlike the ad hoc borrowing of Spanish kings or the fantastic schemes of John Law, the Bank of England created something revolutionary: a permanent, funded national debt. It was a promise, etched into the financial architecture of the state, that the nation would always honor its debts. This created a powerful, self-reinforcing loop of trust. The government could borrow vast sums at low interest, and creditors, from wealthy aristocrats to ordinary shopkeepers buying consols, government bonds, felt secure. Their money was safe. This reliability was Britain's secret weapon. It meant that in a crisis, when other nations found their credit evaporating, Britain could tap into a bottomless well of capital. Picture the London coffee houses of the 18th century not as places of chaotic speculation like Paris, but as sober, wood-paneled rooms where men in wigs calmly discussed the yield on government bonds. The emotional tone was not joy or mania, but a profound, confident stability. This was the boring, powerful bedrock upon which empires were truly built. And they needed it, for a new enemy had emerged who understood this game all too well: Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was not just a military genius, he was a master of psychological warfare, and his primary target was often British credit. He called England not a nation of shopkeepers, but a nation of cobblers, a land of petty, greedy financiers. His continental system was a grand strategic embargo designed not merely to block trade, but to trigger a financial panic in London. He believed that if he could cripple British exports, the government would default, the public would revolt, and his final victory would be assured. It was a direct assault on the foundation of the British state. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed. British warehouses filled with unsold goods, unemployment spiked, there was genuine fear and shock in the financial districts. The pressure was immense, but the system held. The deep, resilient trust in British government debt, built over a century, proved stronger than Napoleon's blockade. The domino, for the first time, refused to fall.
This resilience, however, had a dark and terrifying cost. To survive and ultimately defeat Napoleon, Britain had to become the most prolific debtor the world had ever seen. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, the British national debt had soared to a staggering 200% of its GDP. This is a number that should have been apocalyptic. It was more than twice the debt-to-GDP ratio that broke Spain. But it didn't break Britain, because the British state had made a brutal, calculated decision. It would service this debt by transforming its entire economic structure to extract wealth from the globe. This was the birth of the true imperial war machine. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about technological progress, it was a debt-fueled furnace. The factories of Manchester, spewing smoke and producing textiles, were run on cotton picked by enslaved people in the American South. The vast plantations of India were re-engineered to produce opium, which was then forced upon China to balance the books. The reliability of the British financial system was a beautiful, gilded facade, but it was paid for with the trauma and blood of millions across the planet. The empire became a vampire, sucking the financial life out of its colonies to keep its own heart beating in London. This system worked for a while. The 19th century was the Pax Britannica, a period of relative peace underwritten by the terrifying efficiency of the British Empire and its Royal Navy. But the debt domino effect had not been abolished. It had merely been globalized. And in the early 20th century, the bill finally came due. The stage was set for the ultimate demonstration of the domino effect, the First World War. This was not a war anyone truly wanted in the summer of 1914. It was a war that the financial and military machinery of Europe made inevitable. The complex web of alliances was mirrored by an even more complex web of sovereign debt and military spending. Germany, a rising power, was desperate for its place in the sun and was engaged in a frantic naval arms race with Britain, funded by its own massive borrowing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was a fragile, decaying state riddled with internal debt and ethnic tensions, seeing a foreign war as the only way to maintain unity. The shock of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was merely the spark that landed in a room drenched in the gasoline of imperial debt. Once the gears of mobilization began to turn, they were locked in place by financial necessity. The great powers had spent decades building military machines of unprecedented cost and complexity. To mobilize these armies was to activate the single most expensive endeavor a state could undertake. The moment the first soldier was called up, the first train requisitioned, the first military contract issued, the national credit of every involved power was put on the line. To stop, to hesitate, to demobilize after such an expense without a victory would mean national bankruptcy. The war, therefore, became a financial imperative. It was no longer about the Balkans or honor. It was about which empire could drive its rivals into fiscal collapse first. The generals sent millions of men into the meat grinder of the Western Front, not because they were all fools, but because the financial cost of not attacking was deemed greater than the human cost of attacking. The war had to continue until one side's credit completely shattered. This is the ultimate black pill truth of the debt domino effect. When empires are pushed to the brink, human life becomes a currency they are willing to spend to protect their financial credibility.
That final shattering happened to Russia first. By 1917, the Tsarist regime was militarily defeated and financially exhausted. It could no longer borrow, and it could no longer pay its soldiers or feed its people. The result was revolution, collapse, and a bloody civil war. Germany followed. The Kaiser's government, blockaded and bankrupt, collapsed in 1918, leading to revolution, a punitive peace treaty, and the hyperinflation of the 1920s that would directly fuel the rise of Nazism. Even the victors were not spared. Britain and France emerged victorious but financially crippled, their empires saddled with unsustainable war debts to the United States, the new financial hegemon. The Treaty of Versailles was not primarily a political document, it was a massive bill for reparations, an attempt by the victors to offload their own bankruptcy onto the defeated. It was the debt domino effect codified into international law, and it guaranteed a second, even more terrible war 2 decades later. And so, the domino that began to tip with Philip II of Spain fell, one after another through the centuries until it culminated in the trenches of Verdun and the rise of the Third Reich.
The pattern is terrifying in its reliability. Unpayable debt leads to desperate gambles, which lead to total war, which leads to collapse and the transfer of financial power. We have seen this story 3 times. We know how it ends. The inspiration, then, cannot come from a naive hope that this time is different. The inspiration must come from understanding. To see the dominoes lined up on the global stage is to be armed with the only thing that can break the cycle: foresight. The empires of the past were trapped because they could not see the trap. We, the students of this dark financial history, have no such excuse. The question that now hangs in the air, thick as cannon smoke, is a simple one. Who holds the domino today?